Perfect.
Something about a thorn between two roses.
Very nice.
That not the idiom? Yeah.
I'll take that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, which generation are you then?
Gen Z.
Gen Z.
Yeah.
End of millennial.
Yeah. I'm Gen V. That stands for vintage. Yeah.
Yeah. Round of applause.
And no charge for using that. That's I just made that up. Hey ho. Yeah. Yes, I was born in Lisbon. You're quite right, Michael. But it didn't help my language acquisition at all because I was only there for 1 week. And although I was a precocious little baby, it wasn't that good for language acquisition. No, after a week I ended up in Wales, you see. And that's where I've been ever since. And came down from there this morning in a car and got up rather early. If I fall asleep, you...
I think you emailed me at 6:45, didn't you? So it was early.
Yeah, that's right. If I do nod off, just talk amongst yourselves.
No,
That's fine.
No, you're the star of the show, so
Lord.
stay awake.
Okay, right, I'll do my best.
Yeah.
Onwards then.
Onwards. I'll get us started then. If you could start by telling us something about your background and what sparked your interest in linguistics.
Ah, right. Well, actually, that's part of growing up in Wales. I grew up in a place called Holyhead, which is the port that you go to if you were going across the sea to Dublin, in Ireland. And at the time, Holyhead was a trilingual community. It was English, there was Welsh, and there was actually Irish Gaelic as well in town. And I remember very early on, my mum told me I was 3.5 when I said to her one day, why can she was monolingual English, why can I understand you, but I can't understand him out there? And she said, because you see, darling, they're speaking Welsh. Why don't you speak Welsh? Well, I can't. I want to speak Welsh. And that curiosity that comes, if you grow up in a multilingual area and you don't have immediate access to all the languages, there is an inevitable curiosity that develops. And I so wanted to understand everybody. And so I started to learn. I went to see Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe spoke Welsh. And he started to teach me. And then in school, of course, it was all the Welsh words were on the windows and the doors and things like this. And I grew up with this curiosity in language. Because of that, it was immediately fueled a couple of years later, at age 6. I was brought up in a Catholic family and I served Mass and therefore had to learn Latin. And so suddenly Latin well, that's a strange language, if ever there was one. And so that helped a bit. And then in secondary school, more Latin, French, Greek. I was lucky in the secondary school development. And all in all, a wide range of language experiences of varying degrees of non-fluency, you have to appreciate, meant that there came a point when I thought, is there a subject that actually studies all of this? And I discovered linguistics. And when I did, pure by chance, teachers didn't know about it, but in one of the libraries in Liverpool, I moved to Liverpool when I was 10 and had to learn another language called Scouse. You're right there, you know, the sort of speech, the speech of the Beatles and all the rest of it. And I learned another aspect of language learning, which was this. If you're going to go to a new part of the world, you have to accommodate as quickly as possible to the norms of the community. So I was 10 and I arrive in this primary school and met some of these really tough Scousers. And one comes up to me and says, hey, Taffy, Taffy being the colloquial name for somebody from Wales. Hey, Taffy, why don't you speak like us? And I said, I don't know what you mean, you know, what do you mean speak like you? You got to speak like us, or I'll lip you. Now, to lip somebody is to place the forehead against the lip in a very forceful way. I did not want to be lipped. So within a week, I had lost my Welsh accent and gained a Liverpudlian accent, which is still there, actually, in my normal speech, more than the Welsh is. Anyway, all of this fuels an interest and a fascination, really, with language in all its domains. So when I went to university, what I wanted to do more than anything else was to look at, in the end, I took English, language and literature. I wanted a course which balanced language and lit, 50-50. Found one at University College London. Encountered there the person who changed my life, really, Professor Randolph Quirk, who many of you will, of course, have read. And my first job after getting a degree was with him in his research work on the Survey of English. And then my first teaching job was in a linguistics department, which was, this is the 1960s, remember, we're talking 1962 to 3 to 4 to 5. There were no linguistics departments in the country at that time. There were a couple of language-orientated departments, but no real undergraduate teaching linguistics departments. And that's how I learnt my linguistics, by teaching it. There were no textbooks. What? The students all want a textbook. Well, you're going to have to write one then. And that's how it happened. I started to write books in order to help me teach the subject to the people who wanted to learn about it. And that's how it's been ever since. You appreciate I give long answers to short questions.
It's a good one, thank you.
That was supposed to be a warm-up question as well, but wow.
I'm warm.
I could just listen to you saying about your life and your history. I guess we should go to our next question, though. It's quite a juicy one. So, earlier in your career, what did you envision for the future of the English language?
Yes, well, one of the things that happened very, very quickly, my first linguistics job was at the University of Bangor.
Yeah.
And in those days, there was no undergraduate degree there, but there was postgraduate diplomas in linguistics, including a very large contingent of teachers from around the world. And this was my first experience of teaching English as a foreign language to this group of people from all over the place. Many of them there courtesy of the British Council, of course. That must be acknowledged with great love and affection. And so suddenly I realized that there was more to English than just, Liverpool and Wales and a few other places like this. Because these were people coming with, well, we now know, but at the time it was so fresh and new, and they weren't speaking in the same way. Not just because they hadn't learnt English properly, because they had. These were good teachers of English. Their fluency was wonderful. But there would be so many occasions when I would be talking to them in English, and they were understanding me, and I was understanding them, and then suddenly I was not understanding them, or they were not understanding me. And that was because of some cultural difference. They would just drop into the conversation some point about their culture which was completely out of my experience, or vice versa, I remember one such occasion, we were talking about timepieces, and they noticed my watch, and they said, "Oh, that's a nice watch." I said, "No, it's not Bond Street." And they went, "What? Please? What do you mean?" I said, "Not Bond." "Oh, I see. You do not know that Bond Street is the most expensive street in London." No, they did not know that. So imagine that now writ large. I'm in their country, and they say to me, my watch is not, what is the most expensive street in Berlin or Rio or wherever, And it was then that I began to realize that one of the biggest problems facing English language teaching generally is not the learning of the pronunciation and the grammar and the basic vocabulary. It's getting that level of awareness of the cultural identity of the language. And as time has gone by, of course, this has become increasingly the big thing in the question in relation to the future of English. And now I think of my library at home, you know, 60, 70, 80, 90, I'll forget how many years on. And at home, I have now a series of dictionaries and to some extent grammars and other manuals, but mainly dictionaries representing the cultural identity of so many of the world's Englishes. I mean, for example, I have a dictionary from Trinidad and Tobago, the Creole and other English that is spoken there. It is that thick. It is a huge book. It's got 12,000 items in it that are used only in Trinidad or Tobago, or maybe, of course, some of the adjacent countries. Maybe you, Jake, have encountered some of these spilt over from that part of the world. But that was the biggest surprise. In 1965, I was actually approached to write a book called A Dictionary of English-Speaking Peoples, along with a colleague called Whitney Bolton. And this was 1965. Yeah. And I thought, where do we get our data from? So I wrote to all the English language departments I knew in universities around the world and said, are you doing anything in relation to your own local variety of English? And they all wrote back, every one of them, and said, yes, of course we are. Of course we are. It's all part of the history of English here, wherever we happen to be. We've started to collect data, vocabulary mainly, and idioms and things like that, but to some extent grammar and pronunciation as well, and style. And it all happened because of the way in which people developed their attitude towards the notion of global English. I remember in about that time, in relation to, where was it? In relation to Nigeria, that's right. Nigerian English. And I was in touch with the university there, and they were sending me stuff, local stuff from Nigeria, you know, local Creole words and all the rest of it, starting to collect them. And I said, you know, how has this happened so quickly? Because, you know, independence is not so long ago. How has it happened? And they said, well, it was very straightforward. And they told me their story. And the story was quite simple. And it was replicated in many other parts of the world at the time. We became independent. What does independence mean? It means getting a new flag, a new uniform for your army and all sorts of things, but it meant, what are we going to do linguistically, independently? We have been brought up in a climate of colonial English, British English in this particular case, around the corner in Liberia, American English. What are we going to do now? We want to get away from this colonial history. We want a new language for a new nation. And then the story went like this. And we looked around and thought, which alternative language could it be? There are 400 languages in Nigeria. Which one shall we choose? If we choose that one, they will not like it. If we choose that one, they will not like it. And indeed, there was a civil war not long after. Better stay with English then, was the argument. At least everybody hates it equally. But, and this was the surprising thing, this is what I hadn't expected, let's make it our English. Let's make it our English. And that was the development of it. They actually went out into the streets and byways and started to collect stuff, collect these Creole items and all the rest of it. And it built up and up and up. And by the time I wrote to them in 65 or 66, whenever it was, they had collected several thousand lexical items that were in use in Nigeria, but had never been written down anywhere or in any dictionary or anything like this. Now, the project that we had planned at the time never went ahead for that reason. There's just too much coming in. No publisher could possibly have handled it all. And by the way, mustn't forget, we're also talking about Canadian English, Australian English, New Zealand English, South African English, and things like that. So there was no publication at that time about all this. There was no research journal. There was no English Today. There was nothing like that around at all. These people beavering away all over the world, and the rest of the world didn't know about them. And it's taken quite a long time for that degree of public awareness of global language variety, these new Englishes, to receive the publicity that it's getting today. It took a long time, really. And if you think about it, there weren't even any books on global English until, well, three things happened in the late 1990s. I wrote mine, English as a Global Language. Tom MacArthur was writing stuff. David Graddol, of course, for the British Council, was doing an awful lot. Late 1990s, you see, nearly 30 years later, before the concept of global English started to become routine.
It's a lot more commonplace today, isn't it, to hear about global English and different varieties, isn't it?
Well, it is, and the reason is because, well, for all sorts of reasons. One is that people have developed a pride, but pride is not enough. It's got to be supported by knowledge, by data, by language descriptions, really. And so much of that has happened now. Having said that, it's that there's a huge amount that hasn't happened. There are still many varieties of English in the world where there's been no description whatsoever, just perhaps the occasional article in a journal or something like this, no comprehensive description. The team at University College has an international corpus of English, for example, ICE, they call it, ICE. And they've started to collect stuff, well, I say started years ago now, in a more systematic way. But there are still many varieties of English around the world where very little description has taken place. For those places where there has been some description, the access to it is often not very easy, hence the importance of projects like yours, you see, which suddenly brings some of these things to the attention of everybody. People start to share ideas and say, oh, I could do that as well, you know. Did you do that? So could I. And suddenly new ideas start come up out of a conference of this kind, which is a brilliant idea.
It's quite incredible. And I was just thinking, as you were saying, about preserving anything from Canadian English, Nigerian English, and so on. There was news recently about language in the Black Country that they're looking to try and preserve as well. And that's even more local than countrywide language changes.
Oh, yes. I mean, the distinction between language and dialect is, in a sense, irrelevant here. When we're talking about a variety of English, well, in a country, singular is wrong. Varieties of English in any country. All countries have dialects. There has been dialects ever since the beginning of the human race. Not that I know that personally, but it stands to reason that accents and dialects as markers of identity are absolutely crucial to the development of human language as a whole. I mean, imagine it like this, folks. Let's have a thought experiment. You're in your cave 50,000 or so years ago, 100,000 maybe, and you hear a noise outside, and you shout out in your primitive tongue, "Who's there?" And back comes a voice, "It's me." If you recognize that voice, in other words, if it has the same accent as you, then you can go out and say, you know, "Hey, hi, how are you doing?" and all the rest of it, and get on famously. But if that voice comes back and you don't recognize it, it's an accent that you don't know, then it may be another tribe wanting to take over your cave. So go out there with your club at the ready, just in case. In other words, the ability to recognize, you know that people in evolution talk about the survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
Well, it would seem, at least this is my view, that we're talking here about the survival of the linguistically fittest. In other words, the better you are at accents, the more you're likely to survive, because you can recognize between him and him and him, or her and her and her, or maybe it and it and it in those days. And you know why I think that's a good theory? Because when I was giving a talk once about accents to a group of school kids in a school somewhere, and I gave that story, and one of the kids came up to me afterwards and said, "You know what you were saying about accents in primitive times?" He says, "Well," he says, "it's like that now in this city. There are some streets I go down, and if I hear a certain type of accent round the corner, I'm not going there. not going there. So there was this awareness of accent variation and dialect variation. So, to get back to the point, all languages have a multiplicity of accents and dialects. They will have a standard language of some sort, and this is another aspect of what I was saying before. There might have been a good description of the local standard in a particular country, but what about all the non-standard varieties that are around there? Very few of those have actually been studied in the appropriate way for obvious reasons. You know, not many linguists there, not many resources there, because it's expensive, you know, to actually describe a language, all the recording, you know, all the staff and all the rest of it. So I'm not surprised, but yes. And in this country, dialect studies, of course, have been around a long time, and we've done pretty well at describing most of the main dialects and accents in Britain. But even there are gaps.
And even attitudes as well towards them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. There's always two sides to language, isn't there? There's the two main forces that drive language. The need for intelligibility. We've got to understand each other, and that promotes a standard language. And the need for identity, which promotes accents and dialects. And then the attitudes are built into this. The attitudes towards the standard are usually well recognized. The attitude towards accents and dialects, heck, still these days, some accents get a bad press, and people will say, oh, the people from that part of the country, they're not very intelligent, you can tell by their accent. You know, that kind of statement is still around, unfortunately, despite the fact that we're all trying to get away from this. And in other parts of the world, it's not just an accent, of course, it's the whole dialect area, the whole, you know, that, and you get conflicts between that kind of Creole and that kind of Creole, or that kind of pidgin and that kind of pidgin. So within these communities, there is sometimes tension too.
Exactly.
I think that my question about the value in thinking about the future of English has been somewhat answered by everything in this one. But if you have anything to add about the value of thinking of the future of English.
Well, it's the way things are going, partly for technology reasons, which we perhaps talk about in a bit. You know, in the days when, well, when I was growing up, if I wanted to find out about South African English, I had to go to South Africa. It's the only way. Or perhaps meet a nice South African, which you sometimes did, but only occasionally. That's why all these teachers of English from around the world were so important, because I suddenly found out about Brazilian English and Chilean English and all the rest of the people who were there. These days, totally different world, isn't it? If I want to find out about South African English, dead easy. Just go online,
Google.
Find a dozen sources immediately. Or go to a site that covers all the dialects of the world. Do you know about IDEA, guys? Do you know about this? IDEA, the International Dialects of English Archive. IDEA. It's based in America, run by a chap called Paul Meyer from the University of Kansas. And he's spent years now collecting high-quality recordings of all the main accents and dialects of English around the world. A lifetime job, of course, but he's already got several hundred, maybe even 1,000 now, I can't remember. And they're excellent recordings. And so if you want to hear an example of such and such a dialect from such and such a place, press go, and there it is. Well, you know, that has changed everything. It's you know, changed all the goalposts. We can now study these things. I can now study South African English in a way I could never do, even 20 years ago.
Data's already there, accessible.
And very varied. Because, and now, if we go down market, as it were, or maybe it is up market, I'm never quite sure, into YouTube and social media and things like that, it's no longer just the province of the better educated, as it were, people who are giving us an example of their local language. you get everything now, absolutely everything. And this is both a plus and a minus. I mean, on the plus side, this is fantastic. On the minus side is, how the heck am I going to study all of this? Or are you going to study all of this? Remember, I'm Gen V, I'm past that.
No. Okay, I'll go on to our next question. It's quite a big question. So what key factors do you believe have shaped or will shape the future of English?
Well, the have-shaped ones are well known, aren't they? Because they've now been written about at considerable length over the years. I remember doing a radio series back in the 1980s. It was called English Now, which incidentally finally got permission from the BBC to put them all up on my website. So they're now all available there now, these programs from that decade. And one of the things I would do would to go out into the street and do what they call vox pop, vox populi, get recordings from passers-by. And we were doing a program on global English. Surprisingly, this was 1982 or 83. I remember standing outside Broadcasting House with my microphone, and along comes a gentleman, older gentleman. I stop him and say, "Excuse me, sir, I'm making some recordings for a program." "Oh, yes, delighted, delighted. What do you want to know?" I said, "English is becoming a global language, you know." Oh, yes, yes. "Can you tell me why? Why do you think?" And he stopped and said, "Well, it's obvious, isn't it? I mean, because it's the most beautiful language in the world." What other reason could there be? I said, "No, there must be other reasons, mustn't there?" And he said, "Well, yes, of course, because it's such a simple language. That's why everybody is trying to learn it. It's so simple." I said, "What do you mean by simple?" He says, "Because you don't have all that rubbish like masculine and feminine and neuter and nominative and and he paused on genitive. He wasn't quite sure about that. I think he thought it was something to do with genetics. But these are the reasons," he says. You tell the world that, young man. You tell the world that." So, well, we all know that that's got nothing to do with it, don't we? Yeah, because everybody thinks that their language is the most beautiful one in the world. That's perfectly natural. And English isn't simple, as you all know everywhere. All right, we haven't got that many word endings. No, not that many word endings, but we have got a syntax to die for, have we not? I mean, you only have to look at the big comprehensive grammar of the English language by Randolph Quirk and his associates, all 1,800 pages of it, 2.4 kilos in weight. That's how much grammar there is in English, 2.4 kilos of it. So this is the mythology that's out there.
Yeah.
And so it was very important as soon as possible to try and track down the real reasons. And the real reasons, in the end, when you collapse everything down into one simple statement, is a language becomes an international language or a global language because of the power of the people who speak it. And there is no other reason. But of course, power means different things at different times. So in the case of English, and you all know this, of course, we have to reflect on originally political power, military power, the power of the British Empire, then the American Empire, and so on and so forth. Technological power, the power of the Industrial Revolution, where virtually all the new inventions that were coming into the world were something like 3/4 of them were developed in an English-speaking country. So in order to find out about the new cotton mills or the new locomotives and things like that, you had to know English, otherwise you wouldn't be able to understand the instruction booklet. And then in the 19th century, economic power, money talks. Which language was it talking in the 19th century? It was either British English, Britain thought to be the workshop of the world at the beginning of the century, or American English by the end of the century. Germany, of course, was important, but that developed into a different direction in the 20th century. So economic power, money talks, which language? And then in the 20th century, of course, cultural power. with virtually every cultural innovation in the 20th century either began in an English-speaking nation or was immediately facilitated by an English-speaking nation. Think of advertising and the internet and cinema. Cinema, you see, cinéma began in France, but where was it within 20 years? It was in Hollywood. And all, something like 80% of the films and so on in the world are still being made in the English language. So, these are the sorts of reasons you'll get discussed in these different books about English as a global language. And those reasons stayed fine until relatively recently, when suddenly everything changed. And what changed was the internet. And now it's a different ball game. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Please.
We're going dangerous territory.
Well, we are. And you're talking to the wrong person, in a sense, because being Gen V and all that. I mean, I have never ticked or talked. Ever.
Neither have I, so don't.
Oh, thank goodness.
I can't join you there. I do enjoy scrolling. So.
I'm feeling younger now as a result of that. That's brilliant. No, there's been a big change, not just because of the way the internet arrived, because when it did arrive, and we're talking 1990, essentially, which is when the World Wide Web was introduced. And think about how recent all that is. Well, it doesn't seem so recent now, but you couldn't, nobody sent emails, apart from a few specialists, until the mid-1990s. You couldn't have done a Google search until 1999, because that's when Google arrived. And then you think, when did I first send a text message? Well, that would be early 2000s. A blog? Well, not until things like Blogger came along, which was 2002. Facebook, 2004, YouTube, 2005, Twitter, 2006. It's all so recent. Now, when I wrote my book on language and the internet, that's all I had to go on. And it was, pretty straightforward, really, because there weren't that many varieties. In fact, the question was, is there a NetSpeak, which is what term I used at the time. I wouldn't like to use that now, but at the time, NetSpeak. Is there a single variety of internet English which parallels other varieties of the language, like BBC English or journalistic English or legal English or religious English and things like that? Is there an internet English? And with only things like the web and email and chat rooms to go on, and a couple of other things, it wasn't difficult to see that, yes, there was, and these different varieties, there were varieties of English there, but they weren't that different. And the reason is because only a very small proportion of people in the world were on the internet at that time. Very small proportion. And so there was a kind of accommodation taking place very, very rapidly amongst internet users. And it took a while before individual chat rooms, for example, developed their own identity. I was there. I remember it very clearly, trying to keep pace with all of this. An example. There was one chat room, and when I first encountered it, it was just like any other, and like all the other stuff that was out there. And then one day, somebody typed a message to the chat room about computers, and they spelt the word computer comptour. Just a mistype, a typo. Well, this chat room loved it. Suddenly, everybody decided to spell computer comptour. It became a distinctive feature of that chat room. And it wasn't alone. There were other words that were being misspelt deliberately, as it were, and became part of the dialect of that chat room. So much so that when a new person arrived, a newbie arrived for that chat room and spelt computer, he was told off for misspelling the word comptour, you see. Now, this happened in the kind of late 90s. and into the early 2000s, you see the proliferation of these linguistically distinctive areas of use. And they were changing so rapidly. Rapid change, take Twitter as an example. Twitter arrives in 2006. Were you there? What did you do when you encountered Twitter for the first time? What was the prompt that Twitter gave you? And the prompt was, what are you doing? What are you doing? And if you're going to answer, what are you doing? Think now linguistically. You're going to use the present tense. You're going to use first-person pronouns, amongst other things, of course. And suddenly, there was a variety of English that was growing on Twitter, which was distinct, very distinctive, because it just didn't have the full range of tense forms in English, the full range of personal pronouns, things like this. In November 2009, Twitter changes its prompt, just 3 years later. The new prompt, which is still basically up there, though you can't call it Twitter anymore, was, what's happening? And so now you're going to reply, what's happening? Not just I'm doing something, but you're doing something, he, she, they're doing something. Suddenly all the pronouns start to appear. What happened yesterday? Past tenses. What's going to happen? Future expressions, and so on. Suddenly the language of Twitter changed, virtually overnight. So think of the poor PhD student who in 2008 is going to do some cutting-edge research into the language of Twitter. In 2010, suddenly realizes he's been doing historical linguistics. And his data is completely out of date. Now, this hasn't stopped, you see, because Twitter has evolved into other things, and there are things that weren't around in 2009. Think hashtags and things like that. And it's the speed of change that has been so noticeable, makes it so difficult to study, and makes it now a fresh problem for the English language teaching community and the English language learning community, because there is a increasing cultural gap now between these good generations here and this one and all the others. And that is the surprising thing, the speed at which these changes are taking place and the unpredictable consequences of these changes. Algorithms. You want to talk about that for a bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, I was sent a book by a publisher for a blurb because they knew I'd written on language and the internet. The book was called AlgoSpeak, short for algorithm speak. It's written by a man called Adam Akazic. Akazic, I think that's how you pronounce him. And he introduced me to the new world of what is actually going on out there in TikTok and all of these other domains, which are predominantly driven by youngsters. And I have to say, we've shared this discussion a little bit, and I was blown away by this. I had no idea what changes have been taking place there. Now, some of you will find all this totally boring because you're in there every day. But for me, no. For example, the short attention span that youngsters have when they're engaged in this kind of social media activity. Anything longer than a minute, forget it. And so if you want to say something, you've got to say it in a minute. Maybe a bit longer if you're lucky. Otherwise, they'll just not like you, and they'll switch off and go somewhere else. And so people are now, and you can see all this online, and I started to look at it for the first time just a few weeks ago. Some of the reports that people are making, some of the programs, what do you call them? Trails, reels, isn't that it?
Reels,
Instagram reels and things like this. People are doing in 1 minute, and they have to speak quickly, really quickly. Now let's just for a moment reflect on the research background to speed of speech. When you're studying speed of speech, you are not studying, how do you do it? The methodology is not words per minute, because words can be different lengths. And so you've no idea. No, it's syllables per minute. Now, I am speaking at the moment at a rate of about 250 syllables a minute. If you turn on the radio, listen to Radio 4 News, it speaks at about 200 syllables a minute. Good evening. This is the news, and this is David Crystal reading it.
Wow.
Today in London, something important happened. 200 syllables a minute. If we were to speak at 150 syllables a minute, it would sound something like this. I know some teachers do speak like that. On the other hand, in everyday conversation, where it's informal, 250 syllables a minute is sometimes quite slow. And you get up to 300 syllables a minute. Hey, did you go to see the film the other day? It was absolutely fantastic, wasn't it, that film? Absolutely brilliant. I loved the film. It was really good, wasn't it? That's more like 300 syllables a minute. Some of these 1-minute reports on Instagram and the like are now over 300 syllables a minute, sometimes approaching 350 or 400. It's unbelievably fast. And in terms of listening comprehension, what students do here, I've no idea. I've no idea how they survive in that kind of online world. And what sort of variation is there out there in an international English language learning community, where you will get a mix now of people who are native speakers of English, used to Instagram reels, who are starting to talk in their session just like this, and is gathering away at speed. And then suddenly in comes somebody from a different part of the world speaking at half the speed. And people are basically saying, speed up, and the guy is saying, no, slow down, slow. I don't know what's going on here because I've not studied it. This is Gen V talking, remember? But that is the new world we're dealing with. And the big difference from the internet when I was studying it to now is that everybody is on the internet now.
Yeah.
In those days, just a small group. Today, everybody is. I mean, as long as you're wired. I mean, of course, there are some countries in the world where that kind of comprehensiveness is not yet present. But wherever there are computers and access to online, everybody is now using a computer or a cell phone or something or other. And as a result, these variations in English and the clashes, the tension that is developing between these variations in English are not like anything I've seen before. So the younger you go in studying English now, the greater this problem is going to appear. For older users, there is still a tendency to use a more conservative style. The younger you go, and I'm talking any teenager or younger, they are growing up in a world where this kind of speed is felt to be normal, and where all kinds of colloquialisms and elisions and all the things that we tend to train our students not to do are now being done as a matter of course. Brave new world that has such Instagrams in it.
In light of that, if we've time for one more question.
Have you?
I just wanted to ask then, with the changing nature of English, do you think there will be a change to the way in which English is taught and learned as a result in classrooms?
Well, do you know, this is the easiest question I've had today, because the answer is, I've no idea.
That's fine.
As I have never, John, you know this very, very well, when I was patron of IATEFL for many, many years, I kept saying to the IATEFL gang, why choose me? I have never taught in a classroom in my life. I have no idea what, if you ask me what's going on in a classroom, I have to ask you. And you will tell me, and you did, at length over 30 odd years. And I learned a lot about what's going on in classrooms, they're only because secondhand. I'm a linguist. All I do is I have the easy job in a way. I just describe language and write books about it, and you guys have the difficult job of teaching it and handling it and coping with kids and grown-ups and all the rest of it. I mean, I have the greatest of respect for that world, but I've never been part of it. And so I don't know what the problems are that you're going to face, but identifying the problems is the first job. And that's what I've been trying to do with my work, both in global English generally and in the internet stuff in particular. But having said that, I'm not going to be able to write about what's going on in Instagram and TikTok and the like. That's for a new generation. But the sooner we can get descriptions around, like Adam's book, and that's just going to be the first of many, the better. And then we'll be in a better position. You know, it's the old question, what should I teach in class? British English, American English, what should it be? In those days, it was so simple. There was just British English and just American English, maybe a couple of other things as well. And now there are all these Englishes around and all the internet manifestations of this. It has become a much more difficult job to teach English. And if I was in charge of the world, the first thing I would do is quadruple teacher salaries. Yes, ain't that the truth? I mean, teachers are notoriously underpaid given the level of complexity of the job that they have to deal with. And that professionalism needs to be not just respected, because it is widely respected, but properly remunerated.
I agree. I
agree.
think a lot of people in the audience
Oh,
agree
I'm
as
sure.
well.
And I hear all the cheers online as well.
Yeah.
You're all saying so. Yeah.
Start the petition. Well, we've actually run out of time for our in-discussion, but I think it's time for us to open it up to our face-to-face audience and our online audience as well. So do we have any questions for David? Now is the chance. Yes.
I know I'm not doing a lecture, and I'm not fangirling either. So I'm not a plant. I am from the British Council, but while everyone else is warming up, I wonder. It was going back to the question about dialect, and maybe just in the UK or any other context, with the internet, and I suppose with more mobile populations now, which people are. Do you see, and have you seen a risk to that richness that we have within dialects, where even traditionally it might be within 10 miles, there'll be different words, different accents. Does the internet and the fact that people are engaging and listening and learning to maybe a sort of flatter language, is that threatening that?
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting question. Two things are happening. There is a certain flattening, and there is also a certain growth in awareness of the different variations. We're not just talking about dialects now. We're talking about languages generally, and especially the endangered languages of the world, of which there are so many. Footnote on facts here, there are something like 6,500 languages in the world. There used to be, if you look online, they will say 7,000, but that was some years ago, and some organizations haven't updated their stats yet. But there's a language dying out in the world every 3 months or so on average. And the endangered languages in the world, there are something like, half the languages of the world are endangered, seriously endangered. And so the question is, how do you save them? If you want to save them, and most of the communities do. Not all, but most do. And in the old days, there was no way of doing this. And the same applies to dialects, of course. There are some dialects dying out, and people are upset about this, because culture is changing, and they want to preserve them. So how do you do it? In the old days, it was so difficult. How do you get a newspaper article published on your language or dialect, or a broadcast, a radio program? Now on the internet, it is so easy. So long as you've got your connection, you can have your site up there on your local accent or dialect, as I was saying before with IDEA, or now your endangered language. And there are some very, very strong endangered language communities out there now in all parts of the world. And this has been a huge force for good in that sense, if you think by good if you think multilingualism is a good thing, which I think we all do here. But of course, there are some people in the world who don't like that concept. Not speaking of any names in particular, but just 3 days ago, I understand that a certain American president has cancelled executive order TESOL is up in arms about this, cancelling the order. You know, there used to be an English-only movement in the United States, and this was being countered by executive orders that recognized the value of different languages and different types of English as a consequence. And that order was rescinded just this week. So there's a big fuss going on in the States now and elsewhere as to what can be done about that, if anything. However, I am not going to go there and have a row with Donald Trump about it. But anyway, the point is that there has been a certain flattening in relation to an individual language. I don't know what the balance is. All I know is that accents and dialects that weren't there 20 years ago are there now. So it's going to be a matter really of evolution and of just seeing what happens. And as always, majorities speak on the internet. Always majorities speak. You know, all those likes, all those thumbs up, that's what counts, especially the younger you go. And remember, it is this younger generation that is the crucial one, whether we're talking accents or dialects or languages. We're talking about intergenerational transmission. If there is no intergenerational transmission, a language or a dialect is dead. It's gone. You've got to enthuse the teenagers. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. So how do you do that? And because teenagers are now predominantly internet-orientated, for language teaching, in class or anywhere else, if you ignore the internet now, it's just a totally different world from 20 years ago when CAL, you know, computer-assisted language learning and things like that were felt to be, you know, really cool and all the rest of it, but a bit marginal in some ways. Now the world has changed. That is now the center of these young people's lives. And therefore, and in the old days, books were central, the internet was marginal. Now the internet is central and books are marginal. And we've got to just take, you have got to take that into account somehow. Oh, I'm so glad I'm just a linguist.
We have many online questions, and most upvoted one at the moment is related to AI. This is from Felix from Vietnam. Can the rapid development of AI today influence the future of English? If so, how?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the short answer, dear colleague, is yes. It's bound to. Here too, we're dealing with a surprisingly recent world. When did you start encountering AI? 2020? 2021, something like that. It was around earlier, of course, but it didn't have the acronym AI, and it certainly didn't have the reach that it has at the moment. Call up something on Google these days, and what do you get? You get the AI summary at the top. And it's a pretty good summary for the most part. But there is here, to go back to the previous question, a certain homogeneity of dialect that is up there. The reason, of course, is that the main AI organizations are American. And the rest of the world is lagging behind quite considerably. So, for example, we get American spelling, we get American punctuation, we get American vocabulary to some extent. You know, people will talk about the trunk of a car and things like that. And it's evolving very rapidly, but it's both rapid and slow. I mean, I'm amazed that so much has happened in such a short time. At the same time, I haven't yet seen the variation that is in 10 years' time going to be there as other AI countries start to develop their facilities, and you're going to get a better representation of the language variation, language heterogeneity in the world than we've got at the moment. So, yes, it's an amazing development. And the same point applies, incidentally, to translation devices, Google Translate and all the others, and Deep Translate and things like that. And then there's chatbots. I mean, come on, gosh. When I first started chatting to a robot some years ago, pretty primitive stuff it was too, it was the contrast between what the robot was able to do. And I had to moderate my questions enormously, or statements, in order for it to understand. And now I don't. Now I can talk to it pretty naturally, and I'm getting fairly good responses. That's been another big change too. But we haven't talked today at all, of course. There might be a question coming up about this, about the difference between online conversation and face-to-face conversation. That might come up in a minute.
Yeah.
We could find a way of working that in. But I'm Jim McKinley from University College London, and my question is related to these, recognizing how language shift happens first, and then we find terminology to identify it, right? So world Englishes, and then English as an international language, English as a lingua franca, and we talk a lot about global Englishes now. And with these terms, to try to contain or put boundaries around what we're working with so that we can describe it in our academic work, we move into areas where there's questions around whether or not we are messing up the standards of English because we're trying to open up, right, to all of these different uses, recognizing that a lot of these, language shift happens bottom up. So I'm wondering about your thoughts of how to deal with this aspect, that if we're talking about English in its natural usage, it's uncontained. And so having a standard is quite difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Well, my view on this, again, remember, I'm distant from the ELT world to some extent, but it seems to me that crucial to this question is the distinction between production and comprehension. Production requires, remember the two forces driving language, intelligibility and identity. Production requires a standard of intelligibility. Otherwise, there can be no communication. And insofar as there is a world lingua franca where, on the whole, the variations between, for example, British English and American English are there, but they're just, a few percentage points. The vast majority of all the grammar and phonology and vocabulary in the world's Englishes is pretty well identical. But those few percentage points, 5%, 10%, or whatever they are, absolutely crucial for identity. But people will continue to teach a standard simply because that's what they were taught when they were growing up. That's what they're trained to do. The textbooks are based on a single variety, a standard variety, and so on. The examination boards, crucial people here, are going to test standard English in some sense of that, and so on. So as far as production is concerned, I don't actually think very much has changed over the last few years, although that might change in future. But when it comes to comprehension, listening comprehension and reading comprehension, surely everything has changed. And one has to accept the fact that whatever production language variety of English you are using, that is just the tip of the iceberg of the comprehension varieties that are out there. And of course, teachers do this now quite routinely. Again, I've only seen what I've seen in classrooms and talking to people. And so many teachers now tell me that, yeah, we have this amount of the class on production, we have this amount of the class on listening comprehension. And they go into the main accents and dialects that the students of their class are likely to encounter. So in Australia, for example, it's a very different kind of set of comprehension variations that they'll expose their students to compared with, say, Africa or the United States or wherever. Now, When does that start to happen? Again, I've learned from speaking to teachers, some people consider that to be a fairly advanced level of instruction. That is, you learn your standard, and then later, once you've learned that, you get exposed to comprehension variations. That seems to me to be a historical phenomenon. These days, the kids are encountering, and the adults too, are encountering comprehension variation all around the world because of the internet. So it is, they're with you for how long in a class? An hour here, an hour there, 4 or 5 hours a week, or whatever it might be? And how long are they online? And that's where they're encountering English in all its variation. So one of the basic principles, it seems to me, in language teaching is that right from the very beginning, one says, look, you are going to be taught X, but out there you're going to hear Y and Z and A and B and everything else as well. And so why not, and I know many teachers do this, why not let's just have some of that comprehension stuff while we're learning. So you're teaching British English, and you're teaching about the parts of a motor car, and you talk about the bonnet and the boot. On to the next topic. That's what would traditionally happen. No. Now, but they don't say that all over the world. If you go to America, they say trunk, pavement, sidewalk, Australia, footpath. Yeah. A little bit of that, so that they're slow. It's much better than a kid or adult coming into your next class saying, teacher, the other day you told me at the front of the car was a bonnet, and I heard online somebody call it a hood. What's wrong? Do you not know English, teacher? I mean, to avoid that kind of mismatch between variation and between production and comprehension seems to me is a very important factor. Anyway, they're my thoughts.
This question is from online audience named Dolores. If David Crystal were to write an updated version of English as a global language in 2050, what would be the key themes?
Wow.
Very good question. It ain't going to happen, folks. That is for absolute certainty. I did 2 editions of English as a global language. I did 3 editions of the Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English language. And here's an interesting, and this is what I would focus on if I were to do it again, which I'm not, but if I were. Simply the numbers game. In 1997, when I did the first edition of the Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English Language, SEAL for short, C-E-E-L, first edition of SEAL, there were 1.5 billion, 1,500 million speakers of English around the world. And that figure, incidentally, was also replicated in a couple of other, like David Gradol, for example. I did the second edition of SEAL in 2003. Did the same exercise again. I went around the world to all the countries, asked people there, how many people speak English in your country? Are there any facts? Asked the British Council officers all over the place. They all wrote back and said, we think there's this number. There are so many people, kids taking exams in English and so on. They got some figures. That's how I did it. Did the same methodology in 2003. The figures grew to 2,000 million, 2 billion. So think about that. In 8 years, 6 years, my maths is terrible, a growth from 1,500 to 2,000. I did the same exercise in 2018 for the third edition of SEAL. And the figure of global English use was 2.3 billion, 2,300 million speakers around the world. So there was still growth in English. But notice, not as much growth as there was before. The speed of which, 1,500 to 2,000 in 6 years, if that speed of growth had continued, by 2018, there ought to be over 3 billion in the world. And there wasn't. It was more like 2.3 or so. All because of L2. The number of native speakers had stayed the same, more or less 400 million or something like that. but the growth had flattened. Why? Now, if I were writing another edition of Global English, I would want to know why and try to explore that. There are all sorts of possible reasons, aren't there? Maybe there's a limit to the number of people who need English. Maybe there is. Not in the cities, maybe, but out in the countryside. Maybe there's only so many. Maybe the internet has been a factor here. Maybe translation facilities. If you can now Google Translate just like that, why bother learning English? You know, all of these factors must be there. And I don't know the answer because I've not researched it, but that's what I would do next. So somebody out there, please, good research project, good PhD, several PhDs here, on why is there a flattening in the global totals for English speakers?
Any questions in the room? We have.
Loads online.
Richard Smith from Warwick University, and just listening to you today, David, especially, I was struck how so much of talk of the future of English is actually answerable or answered or needs to be answered by looking back. And it struck me how interested you are as a linguist in history, in the history of the language, as well as its current trends. And it strikes me today, especially, how much as a linguist you are a historical linguist. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, historical linguistics has been, with me all my life, really. Thanks to that course that I did, or the set of courses I did originally at University College, where I learned Old English, Middle English, the feeder languages to English, like Gothic and Old Norse. Had courses in all of those. And historical linguistics became my first love, in fact, and has stayed with me ever since. And what has surprised me has been the way in which the history of the language has become popular, in the sense that there are large numbers of people out there who are absolutely fascinated by the question of how has any language, but English in particular, developed over time. What are the factors that cause a language to change? What are the stages in the language from Old English to Middle English to early modern English to modern English? And in particular then, and this is the most recent trend, how did these languages, these stages of a language, sound? And so there's not time to go into this at length, but I have a website called originalpronunciation.com, in which you can hear examples of Old English, spoken, reconstructed, Beowulf and the like, and this is the main trend, Shakespeare. Shakespeare is the driving force here. All over the world, Shakespeare is the most well-studied English dramatist, as you know, and people wanted to find out how Shakespeare would have sounded in his own time. What was Shakespeare's accent? Or let me put it another way, what was the sound system, the phonology, that Shakespeare used when he was writing his plays? And the reason for this interest is because people began to be aware that there's an awful lot of Shakespeare where, for example, the rhymes do not work. They don't work now. If this be error, he says in one of his sonnets, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. What? They're supposed to rhyme. Was it proved and looved, or was it proved and loved? Well, you do the research, and you show that it was proved and loved. Words like prove and move were pronounced prov and mov. Wars rhymed with stars, wars and stars, and so on. And in 2004, Shakespeare's Globe in London decided to mount an original pronunciation, a long word, OP, original pronunciation, OP, production of Romeo and Juliet in OP. It was hugely successful, and since then, it's become a bit of a movement. And around the world now, people are doing productions in Shakespeare in OP, and it's just produced, it's become so appealing. And other centuries have attracted this kind of interest as well. So it fascinated me because, you know, I had studied historical phonology for decades. I never thought for one moment it would be useful to anybody. And then suddenly, out of the woodwork, come all these people saying, yeah, we want to know, we want to know, we want to know. And so historical linguistics has now become an applied historical linguistics in so many different ways, and that's been the fascinating development.
So yeah, another online question from Kinsley. This is the second most upvoted question as well. Will the English language continue to dominate as a global lingua franca, or will other languages like Mandarin, Spanish, or Arabic gain prominence?
A question about the future of English in the long term is a question really about the future of the world, about future politics, about future economics, and the like. Remember, a language becomes international or global because of the power of the people who speak it. So you're asking me to predict the power politics of the world over the next, what, 1,000 years? That isn't for me. That is for a special British Council project that I'm sure you'll take on one day. It is unpredictable. Think back 1,000 years. If you had said to people 1,000 years ago that in 1,000 years' time, nobody will know Latin, apart from a few conclave-type people and the like. Nobody will know Latin. They would have locked you up. They would have thought you were mad. So you ask me, what will English be in 1,000 years' time? I have no idea. It could be any of the other dominant languages in the world if the background to those languages achieves some sort of global dominance, whether political or economic or whatever it might be. So it could be Chinese, or it could be Spanish, which is probably one of the world's fastest growing languages at the moment. Or if they land, it could be Martian, or anything, really. So I don't know. All I know is that at the moment, none of the other dominant languages in the world are showing anything like the speed of globalization that we're seeing in the course of English, in the case of English. That 2.3 billion is a heck of a lot, even though it is flattening out a little bit. And if you go to these parts of the world, well, you tell me, you're from these parts of the world. Tomorrow you'll hear from China and so on. You know, English is still a very important language learning opportunity in China, and likewise elsewhere. So I don't see any significant change taking place in the immediate future, but in the longer future, who knows?